The Bayesian, a 56-meter luxury superyacht, is peacefully anchored just a few hundred meters from the harbor. Suddenly, it is hit by a terrifying storm. Within minutes, it is overwhelmed by a huge wall of wind and water.
Già era tutto distrutto.
Capsizing the boat and throwing 16 people into the sea. Sailors nearby look on in shock as the £30 million superyacht sinks.
We were looking around with binoculars and she was gone.
And 7 lives are lost. This film analyzes minute by minute the sinking of the Bayesian and the factors behind the tragedy.
When you go to anchor, you'd think it makes you safe, but it actually makes you quite vulnerable.
Usually a yacht of that size isn't going to just sink by a thunderstorm.
We hear from those who risked their lives in an attempt to save the victims.
Quelle immersioni a quella profondità erano immersioni molto brevi.
We examine the science of yacht design.
When we design vessel, we try and account for the kind of weather that the vessel might see.
And look at how increasingly dangerous weather is wreaking havoc on ships, large and small.
There are more and more intense weather events happening. Could we correlate that to global warming? Probably.
We ask what can be done to prevent such disasters. And how safe are our seas? The superyacht Bayesian has dropped anchor for the night, 500 meters from Porticello Harbour in Sicily. On board is Mike Lynch, a billionaire tech entrepreneur, his wife Angela, whose company owns the yacht, their daughter Hannah, and 9 other guests, who are all celebrating Mike's legal victory over Hewlett-Packard after a long battle in the US courts. They are being looked after by a 10-strong crew under the command of Captain James Cutfield, an experienced sailor from New Zealand. The 56-meter-long Bayesian was built by the Perini Navi Viareggio shipyard in 2008, boasting the world's tallest aluminium mast at 75 meters when it was launched. It was an innovative and daring design, with a luxurious interior to match. At the end of the evening, everyone retires to bed and crew member Matthew Griffiths is left on watch. All day, the weather had been hot and calm, but overnight, thunderstorms were predicted. Moored close to the Bayesian is the 42-meter-long sailing yacht, Sir Robert Baden-Powell. Its German captain is Carsten Borner.
The sea state was calm, but there were thunderstorms predicted for the whole north coast of Sicily. We watch our own radar in real time. You can follow the thunderstorm. The water temperature was, for many weeks, mostly 32 degrees. And this can cause rotating systems like tornadoes, hurricanes, and so on. And after this hot period, thunderstorms can be dangerous. And that night it happened.
On shore, the manager of Baia Santa Nicolicia saw the storm building.
C'era l'allerta meteo, si sapeva che ci sarebbe stato brutto tempo. Abbiamo chiuso un po' più pronti a un'eventuale pioggia o vento. Tutto assieme arriva l'acqua e proprio in neanche un minuto pioggia proprio fortissima.
The thunderstorm came close and we started our engine to be prepared and started closing everything, the hatches and the windows and the portholes and so on.
On board the Bayesian, The night watch, Matthew Griffiths, has woken the crew, who are now all on deck, doing exactly the same, fastening down anything that might move.
Good seamanship would dictate that when there is thunderstorms or potential for wind and rain, the vessel would take adequate precautions. From a watertight integrity perspective, they need to make sure that other vessels aren't getting too close, but also keeping an eye on that weather.
Depending on the severity of the weather, they may also want to consider at which point would they consider waking up the captain.
Some of the passengers climb on deck, woken by the storm and the boat rocking violently in the waves. 6 people, including Mike Lynch, are still in the cabin area. At 3:45 a.m., the storm becomes even more violent.
It was a very sudden wind, and our ship was heeling, and I started immediately pushing with the engine, and then the water was wide, and there was massive water in the air. It was really difficult to see anything because it was so full of water that it was difficult to breathe.
Captain Borner slams his engines into full throttle, raising his anchor to fight the gusts and gales.
Another real fundamental here is you come up on your main engines. You start your engines, then at least you're ready. And you just drive very, very slowly. You stem the wind, essentially. In this instance, if you're at anchor, you'd think it makes you safe, but it actually makes you quite vulnerable because you're now tethered to the seabed. And that changes the whole sort of dynamic of your ship.
The final 16 minutes of the Superyacht's fight against the storm is recorded thanks to the automatic identification system, which links the ship's onboard instruments to coastal stations to accurately track the vessel. It shows the Bayesian drifting for 400 meters in the storm.
All the time that the wind was there, I was busy keeping the ship in the wind. Some of the crew and the passengers were with me on the aft deck, and looking around, we watched the Bayesian because we also wanted to avoid to drift on them.
Mike Lynch's wife, Angela, is woken by the sound of breaking glass when the boat violently tilts. She rushes up onto deck, cutting her bare feet on the glass as she does so. She later tells an Italian newspaper that it was terrifying. Back on shore, Fabio is shocked by the destruction of his bar.
Appena aperto la videocamera già era tutto distrutto. E che succede? Arrivo, giustamente vedo tutto il locale con tutte le sedie e tavoli che hanno fatto una trentina di metri. Altre volte c'è stato vento forte, ma non così.
The power on the yacht appears to go out, suggesting that water has reached either the generator area or the engine room. At 4:05 a.m., it vanishes from the tracking system. Surveillance footage recorded from the Porticello harbour recorded its last moments. A minute later, at 4:06 a.m., an emergency beacon sends a distress signal and the Bayesian's last location to the Coast Guard. On the Sir Robert Baden-Powell, Captain Borner and his crew saw the shocking sight of the Bayesian's last moments.
My first mate says, "She's gone, she's sunk," and I was laughing at him. I said, such a big thing doesn't disappear in a minute. And he was right. In the lightning, I saw a big black triangle. And this might have been the moment that the ship was capsized and sank over the stern. So first the ship on the side and then the bow sticking out of the water. We were looking around with binoculars and watching the radar and looking at the AIS. And she was gone.
Just 16 minutes after the storm first hit, the superyacht Bayesian has sunk. 10 crew and 6 passengers, including Charlotte Golansky and her baby daughter, are thrown into the broiling sea. Later, Charlotte recounted her ordeal to an Italian newspaper as being like the end of the world. She described holding her baby aloft to keep her from drowning, and in the darkness screamed for help, but all she could hear were the screams of others. This was a 56-meter superyacht designed to withstand the harshest of conditions. What kind of freak storm could cause the Bayesian to capsize and sink so rapidly?
Usually, a yacht of that size isn't gonna just sink by a thunderstorm. So suspicion is that either a so-called waterspout or a downburst did contribute to the sinking.
Waterspout is basically a tornado over a body of water. So we have a pre-existing rotation in the storm, and that helps to create strong rotation near the ground, and then very strongly stretch it, and you get a very powerful whirlwind. Waterspouts can be the most damaging types of tornadoes with these very strongly rotating thunderstorms.
The alternative theory is that it was a downburst.
Let's imagine that this bubble of air ascends through the whole troposphere to the height of 10 to 12 kilometers, and the gravity pulls down on this core of the storm that is filled with precipitation, and it begins plunging towards the ground. And it is accelerating down, and with a very powerful downdraft speed.
That leads to the winds spreading out. And if you're in a path of that wind, it's gonna be very hefty, not for very long, probably 1 to 3 minutes. And it's extremely sudden. It's essentially the rain is flying horizontally against you. And if you have a yacht sitting there with like a huge ass mast, there's no sail set. Even that is enough spatial area for it to be affected by such strong winds. And it flips over. In the vicinity of the yacht, the camera footage at least suggests that it was a bit longer lasting and more straight line. And this is more in line with the downburst. The average downburst speed is up to 90 miles per hour. So just lower the car window while you're on a highway and then hold your head outside. And this is what you experience in that moment, except there's a ton of rain also hitting you at the same time. So you don't want to be in a downburst, let's put it that way. You do not have the time to react because it's so sudden. You may have all the lightning, you may even hear thunder, and suddenly like this wall of wind and rain hits you. And then it's basically too late, and that's when they probably just woke up.
Captain Kelly Gordon was caught in a downburst when she was in charge of a superyacht in 2022 on Lake Michigan.
What's important to understand is this all happens so fast. I kept my guests calm and had them stay seated all safely inside so that myself and my deck stew could work through what we needed to work through, but the downburst wasn't forecast. You have minimal time to react with this. It just comes so quickly and so violently.
Joe Lewis was also caught in a downburst in 2022 while working as a deckhand on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Shortly after going to bed, it was hit by a powerful downburst that caused it to heel over.
I feel the boat listing, and I opened my porthole and I could see, well, I couldn't see anything. All I could see was like a strobe light and just torrential rain and the boat just rocking around like this. We lost furniture, we lost all the cushions, we lost a door, came off its hinges, snapped in half, glass everywhere. It was terrifying.
The Bayesian has capsized and sunk, and everyone on deck has been thrown overboard. Fortunately for them, the life raft is also in the water.
They were thrown into the water. It was impossible for them to launch the life rafts. What happened in the minutes after that is this life raft came to the surface, and it's all down to the hydrostatic release procedure. A hydrostatic release unit is attached to the straps that secure the life raft down. Should the ship sink and you haven't got time to launch a raft, then there's equipment that cuts away the life raft, that frees it up to inflate. And thankfully for the survivors, the hydrostatic release has probably saved their life.
The survivors in the water scramble on board the life raft, and as quickly as the intense storm arrived, it dies away. On shore, Fabio surveys the damage to his bar.
Che è successo? Che è successo? Boh, non lo so. E notiamo che mancava la barca. L'abbiamo poi notato subito. E ci siamo detti, vabbè, se ne saranno andati. Dico, non ti vai mai a immaginare che questa affonda. Cioè, difatti l'altro mio socio, ti pare che è affondata. E io mi fiondo dentro perché sono andato a vedere dentro se c'era la finestra chiusa o aperta. Il tempo che entro hanno sparato il razzo.
A red flare is an internationally recognized distress signal. So every mariner knows that when they see a red flare, this means there is a distress situation. So they alerted the authorities.
I saw a red flare. And then my first mate and we decided it's quiet now, we can go aboard, and we jumped into the tender.
Captain Borner and his crew scour the sea in search of the survivors.
A moment later, we saw a flashing light, and this was the light of the life raft. And the people in the raft saw us coming, I think, and waved also with a torch. Then we approached and found 15 people, including a baby and 4 wounded. And first we tried to tow the raft, but this was impossible. So we took the people over to our tender and brought them to the ship. The people were very quiet. Only the baby was crying a bit. I think they were under shock, all of them.
As the sun creeps up over the horizon, the Italian Coast Guard reaches the Sir Robert Baden-Powell and takes all the survivors back to the harbour and into the local hospital. Dr. Domenico Cipolla of Di Cristina Children's Hospital in Palermo found himself treating the baby and her parents.
Poi, diciamo, nel corso delle ore abbiamo saputo, la mamma chiedeva sempre del marito che era stato portato nel nostro stesso ospedale, però in un altro presidio, a pochi minuti da qui. La mamma, dopo che è riuscita a parlare col marito, si è un poco più rassicurata, e però piangeva e chiedeva se avevamo notizie dei dispersi. La mamma ha raccontato che si è trovata in acqua con la bambina che teneva strettamente accanto a sé. C'era già la scialuppa di salvataggio appena messa in acqua. Lei, avvicinandosi alla scialuppa di salvataggio, ha raccontato che lei è sfuggita per 2 o 3 secondi, la bambina, ed è riuscita a recuperarla subito, ad abbracciarla, ed è salita sulla scialuppa. E raccontava questo momento come con una paura incredibile negli occhi, e come se fosse un piccolo miracolo che era riuscito a trattenere la bambina.
As the news of the tragedy flies around the world, there is shock that a boat the builders claim is unsinkable has capsized and is now lying 50 meters underwater. Giovanni Costantino, CEO of the company which built the yacht, has publicly defended his boats, saying that Perini sailing ships are the safest in the absolute sense, and that thanks to the structure and the drift keel, they become unsinkable bodies.
The Bayesian is built to very strict rules and regulations. Some of them cover the stability of the vessel. And as part of this, the vessel has to be subdivided into watertight compartments. The idea being that should one of those compartments be ruptured and water freely flood inside, the vessel should remain afloat. In the case of the Bayesian, there are 5 sub-compartments.
At the front of the Bayesian, there is a storage compartment, followed by the crew's quarters. The wider middle part of the vessel is where the 6 luxurious passenger cabins are. This is followed by the engine room, and the last compartment is where the tender and jet skis were stored.
For a vessel like the Bayesian to sink so quickly without any major structural failure is very puzzling. It really hints at water finding its way on board on multiple compartments.
Boats from the harbour assist in the search for survivors, and by early afternoon, divers from Italy's rescue services arrive. There are still 6 people missing. Mike Lynch, the billionaire tech entrepreneur, and his daughter Hannah. Mike's New York attorney, Christopher Morvillo, and his wife, Nida. And the Morgan Stanley executive, Jonathan Bloomer, and his wife, Judy. One member of the crew is also missing, the yacht chef, Riccardo Thomas.
I sommozzatori sono stati subito chiamati e sono subito intervenuti, hanno fatto una prima immersione intorno allo scafo per vedere se c'erano superstiti o se c'erano corpi intorno allo scafo. Infatti il cuoco è stato recuperato subito fuori dallo scafo.
Riccardo Thomas's lifeless body is retrieved. He has drowned. The divers must now continue searching for the remaining 6 passengers inside the yacht. It's hard work, with the yacht resting at a depth of 50 meters, but they're hoping there might be survivors trapped in an air pocket.
Air pockets form when water comes in very quickly and pushes the air to the higher part of the vessel as the vessel goes under. So it can provide pockets where people can survive. But getting people out of air pockets can be particularly challenging. We don't know how much time we have to get to people. And even where we do locate them, being able to then get somebody into that air pocket with them, to give them equipment such as dive equipment to get them out, takes a huge amount of time.
Le prime immersioni che abbiamo effettuato nel relitto le abbiamo fatte di notte, quindi già con poca visibilità abbiamo individuato la plancia di comando dove c'era una scalinata che arrivava in un salone, una scala a chiocciola molto stretta. Quella ci ha permesso di dare, una prima occhiata nel salone e vedere se ci fosse qualcuno o comunque farci un'idea sulle condizioni del relitto. Le possibilità di trovare qualche sopravvissuto erano abbastanza limitate.
Overnight, the dive teams have studied plans of the Bayesian superyacht to help them find the remaining 6 passengers who are trapped below deck. As they dive again, they know that their search time is severely limited in very difficult conditions, at a depth of 50 meters.
Quelle immersioni a quella profondità erano immersioni molto brevi di permanenza dentro al relitto, perché poi abbiamo, il famoso accumulo di azoto, abbiamo dei tempi di risalita molto lunghi. Quindi la parte operativa era intorno ai 10-15 minuti.
It's incredibly difficult to search the inside of a sunk vessel. You're trying to navigate in almost complete darkness because at 50 meters there's not a lot of natural light that gets down to there. And the biggest risks that they face is this risk of entrapment. The hazards are the furniture and all the other debris that finds itself broken loose in the vessel, and it is a seriously risky business.
La nave era rovesciata su un fianco. Poi una volta arrivati all'interno c'è tutta una serie di suppellettili, di mobilio, coperte, tende, vestiti, soprammobili, porte, comunque fluttuano nell'acqua e crea un ostacolo. Per il passaggio bisogna spostare queste cose, bisogna spostarle un po' alla volta, bisogna fare piano per non alzare il polverone, altrimenti non si vede niente.
It is now 36 hours since the boat sank, and the chances of finding the passengers alive is diminishing. But the divers do make an important discovery. One of the early theories was that the mast had broken in two and damaged the hull. But the divers tell a different story.
Noi abbiamo fatto le prime immersioni già intorno all'imbarcazione e l'albero nella parte diciamo proprio attaccata all'imbarcazione era intatto.
And further dives confirmed the mast to be in one piece. Although the builders of the yacht deny it, some news reports ask whether the 75-meter aluminium mast, one of the largest in the world, could have contributed to capsizing the vessel.
The Bayesian is characterized by its very tall mast. You have to realize the sheer scale of it. You could walk inside of the mast for pretty much 2/3 of its length. When we design a mast, we want to make sure that even in strong winds, even without sails, it wouldn't be sufficient to capsize the vessel. There is, however, a limit to what we can practically do. To make an analogy, if you wanted any car to survive a car crash, you would need to build a tank, and that would burn a lot of fuel, it would be very heavy, and it wouldn't really be what your typical driver want to drive. So we designed for what we expect the vessel to encounter, but if you wanted to survive something like a hurricane, the amount of materials that you would need to get that strength would make the vessel very heavy, very low in terms of its performance.
The Bayesian's tall aluminium mast is balanced by over 150 tons of ballast and a 50-ton flat-blade keel that protrudes beneath the yacht's hull.
With the mast the size of the Bayesian, we need a very heavy but also a very deep keel. But obviously that's going to be a hindrance when we try and get into harbour or if we want to moor close to the coast. This is where the idea of the lifting keel comes in.
The keel on the Bayesian is retractable, meaning from its full extension of 10 meters, it can be retracted to 4 meters.
A lot of times you'll see retractable keels on sailboats. So as you enter an anchorage, typically the waters get shallower and shallower. So you're going to want to retract that keel or bring that up so that you don't have so much draft down into the water.
A keel adds a lot of stability and a lot of safety to the vessel. Where the vessel was anchored, with the depth of water, we would think that having the keel down would be a prudent thing to do.
But overnight, with sleeping guests in mind, the keel may not have been down.
With the keel down, the anchor catches against the keel and the anchor can make a knocking sound. So prioritizing comfort over safety, perhaps, that's going to cause problems. However, at this stage, we don't know. We don't know whether the keel was up or down. So from an investigation perspective, there'll be a couple of key elements that I'd be keeping an eye out for. One of them is the position of the keel. So seeing if the keel was fully deployed, if it was half deployed, or whether it was fully stowed. The second thing, which is going to be a consideration, is the watertight integrity of the vessel.
Because the vessel remains intact, it very much hints at water finding its way on board the vessel. We know there was strong winds, so we suspect the vessel was rolled over on its side and started to take on water. Where it took on water is really the puzzling element because it shouldn't sink that fast.
The boat builders have suggested that the large door at the rear of the boat had been left open. But photos taken by passengers from the Sir Robert Baden-Powell earlier that night and later at 3:52 a.m. appear to show it closed. There is some speculation in the press that due to the stifling overnight heat, hatches were left open, leading the superyacht to take on water.
There was reports that there was portholes and hatches open on the vessel to allow the wind to keep people cool at night. You know, this is a state-of-the-art luxury superyacht. It would be fitted with air conditioning. You know, they wouldn't be forcing millionaires to be sleeping, you know, sweating in the Mediterranean summer. They may have had hatches and doors open, I don't know, but that wasn't done on the basis of it being a warm night. So that would lead me to be keeping my eyes open for doors on the stern or the back of the vessel that were open, but also the internal watertight doorways designed to hold back a solid wall of water. The other consideration is there'll be certain areas on a ship or a boat above a certain height of the waterline which will not be watertight. You're looking at ventilation systems, you're looking at doorways, windows, because there's no expectation the vessel will ever get submerged to that level, and if it does, the vessel's already lost.
Off the coast of Sicily, divers continue to search the Bayesian. But there is still no sign of the 6 passengers on board.
Dopo una serie di immersioni, dopo aver ispezionato, abbiamo deciso di scendere al piano inferiore, che è quello che era la zona notte. Noi abbiamo iniziato l'ispezione in modo sistematico, abbiamo iniziato dalla prima stanza subito vicino all'ingresso e abbiamo fatto una stanza dopo l'altra.
As the hours pass, the only remaining hope is that the missing passengers have managed to find air pockets within the sunken yacht. But with all the crew accounted for, except the chef Ricaldo Thomas, did the crew have an advantage over the passengers?
The crew spend a large amount of time on board that vessel, so they'll spend a lot more time than the guests on board, so they know the layout, they know the construction, they know the safety equipment better than the guests. They also are trained how to safely abandon a vessel.
Crew receive their marine training at centres like Seascope.
For as long as you work at sea, there's always courses and training you need to do. My role in the industry most recently was bosun, so I work on deck. Every crew member has to do the basic safety training, firefighting, sea survival. There's medical examinations you have to do. Every 5 years, every crew has to do a refresher course, which is on your personal survival techniques, so sea survival.
Safety drills don't stop after the crew get their certification, and the onus is on the yacht's captain to make sure that their crews are primed to deal with any calamities they might face at sea.
My responsibility as a captain is safe operation and navigation of the vessel, and then safety of the crew and the guests on board as well. Crews are going to train about once a month for a fire, for a sinking, for an abandoned ship. So we have several drills that we go over.
We have to drill for a man overboard at least once a month. If we have a turnover of crew, there's new faces, fresh crew, we do it more than once a month because they need to familiarise themselves with the equipment. We have a rescue boat, and it's just getting the crew familiar with the launching procedure, making sure it's launched as safe as possible.
Regular onboard safety drills are mandatory for the crew, but for passengers on private yachts, it can be a very different story.
For the crew, when you join a new yacht or a ship, you have to do training, even if you're experienced. And you'll do training for that boat because every boat's different. But this doesn't always happen with the guests. Sometimes they'd say, oh, the whole guest party's going ashore for 6 hours, we're going to do a drill. So we do the drill when they weren't there because they don't want to disturb them, right? But they're not participating in that drill.
This is in stark contrast to the safety regulations for over 30 million people who take cruises every year. Regulations that were severely tightened after the tragic sinking of the Italian cruise ship, the Costa Concordia, in January 2012, when 32 people lost their lives.
One of the biggest changes that came out of the Costa Concordia was the passenger drill. So we used to do the passenger drill within 24 hours of the vessel leaving port. That's now changed, that the passenger drill is done prior to leaving port.
While we don't know what safety drills the Bayesian guests received, many believe they should be made compulsory for passengers on private yachts.
It must be a regulation now. It must be a requirement for captains on super yachts to have regular boat exercises to involve the guests.
In the waters off Porticello in Sicily, the search for the 6 missing guests on the Bayesian superyacht enters a 3rd day. A helicopter is drafted in to help with a sea search, along with remotely controlled underwater vehicles and naval units. Finally, divers find 5 bodies.
Le vittime sono state trovate nella parte sotto. Abbiamo trovato persone in una stanza. Considerando l'ora del naufragio, erano tutte in camera che stavano dormendo. Il fatto che siano state trovate insieme potrebbe, sono delle ipotesi, far supporre che magari si siano riunite insieme per uscire o per darsi conforto.
Over the next 2 days, the victims are brought ashore, where dozens of emergency services staff wait to receive them. The guests recovered are Christopher and Nida Movillo, Jonathan and Judy Bloomer. The 5th body to be brought up is that of Mike Lynch. Early reports in the Italian press on the autopsies reveal that 4 of the bodies were found to have no water in their lungs.
These are fatalities where they've actually found no indication of seawater or drowning, which indicates to me that the casualties succumb to suffocation, at least in the initial stages of the sinking. The people were alive even when there was water within the vessel.
It's very likely that the victims had a pocket of air for a period of time from which they were able to breathe until they depleted all of the oxygen in there.
It's now 4 days since the Bayesian has sunk. The search resumes for the remaining missing person, Mike Lynch's daughter, Hannah. Her mother and family are hoping against hope that she will still be found alive.
E abbiamo fatto una stanza dopo l'altra con più immersioni per essere certi della bonifica, cioè del fatto che nella stanza non ci fosse più nessuno. Per un puro caso comunque la ragazza era in fondo, nell'ultima stanza, anche perché comunque la ragazza era piccola, minuta, quindi il corpo era nascosto da materassi, eccetera. Abbiamo impiegato un po' più tempo per riuscire a vederla. E a livello emotivo siamo abbastanza frenati, anche se comunque recuperare generalmente un bambino, una persona in giovane età, comunque ti lascia un po' qualcosa rispetto magari a un adulto. E emotivamente forse quella è la parte un po' più brutta del nostro lavoro.
Now that all the bodies of the 7 people who tragically lost their lives have been retrieved, investigators must establish how the Bayesian sank.
La vicenda che ci occupa ha avuto inizio lunedì scorso, giorno 19.
Italian prosecutors announced they are opening a manslaughter and culpable shipwreck investigation. On Monday the 26th of August, the captain James Cutfield is placed as an official suspect in the investigation. Followed 2 days later by the ship's engineer Tim Parker Eaton and the crew member Matthew Griffiths, who was on watch at the time of the storm. Under Italian law, this is purely a procedural process and does not imply guilt. But the Bayesian crew have not spoken publicly about the tragedy since the investigation started. The wreck, however, must be salvaged so that it can be examined for any structural or operational issues which may give answers to what happened.
There's a lot of talk about recovering the vessel, partly for the investigation, but also because it's a big environmental hazard. There's thousands of liters of fuel on board the vessel. So the ambition is to be able to take the vessel out of the water. However, it's a very large vessel. It will take a lot of time to plan the operation safely and then to execute that safely.
Salvage expert Bertrand Sibaud has been recovering shipwrecks for 40 years and understands only too well the challenges of raising the Bayesian completely intact.
At this depth and in this water, you can always try to salvage a kind of vessel with the barge method. You will need a big barge and you will put big slings underneath the hull of the Bayesian, and you salvage it very slowly with a big crane on the barge. You have to be very careful to keep it intact. You always have risk that a sling break or something in the wreck break, and the whole operation is done. You know, the boat can go back in the water. It's a very expensive operation, of course, yeah, more than 2 million for sure.
In the meantime, elite Italian Navy divers are sent down to comb the Bayesian wreck for clues. The divers recover CCTV and onboard computer data recorders, which the prosecutors will be examining for their investigation.
So as part of the recording, you might have access to the GPS position of the vessel in the 16 crucial minutes, but also any sudden changes in the direction, but also the strength of the wind that might have caught the vessel by surprise.
Prosecutors are determined to discover what led to the sinking of the Bayesian after it was hit by a violent storm on that fateful morning of August 19th. But whether or not the design of the yacht or the actions of the crew played a part, there's no doubt the sudden freak weather event was a major factor in the tragedy. Is this a sign of things to come?
As a mariner, we don't expect humongous prolonged storms and periods of bad weather in the Mediterranean. In the past, the Mediterranean's always been lucky because we've had fine, calm, sunny weather, which is why it's popular for cruising, popular for the superyachts as well. But you know, the evidence before us is that the climate is changing.
Climate change. Climate change is the biggie. We have known for decades that the Mediterranean will be one of the climate change hotspots, and it's playing out in real time into dangerous territory. And on that day, some 15 plus waterspouts were recorded.
The increasing sea surface temperature can lead to more low-level moisture content, which gives energy to storms. So if the storm forms over the Mediterranean, if the sea is extremely warm, it can give more power to the storm. And the Mediterranean has recorded its highest sea surface temperature on record this summer.
The United Nations climate body warns that Europe is the fastest warming continent in the world, with temperatures rising at twice the global average.
We have been in a similar situation exactly 2 years ago in Corsica. Very warm water, first quiet and then huge clouds and lightnings, and then it burst in seconds. I think 220 boats were thrown on beaches around Corsica and 6 people died.
Storms, thunderstorms, they become more heavy, become more frequent. They become stronger, they become more destructive. Also, downbursts occur more often in those cases.
So what does that mean for those of us planning on sailing or cruising around the Mediterranean?
My advice to holidaymakers It's clearly, if you go sailing to the Mediterranean, you need to be weather aware, and especially the later you go into the season, the higher the frequency of the storms. And do not consider Mediterranean as just a nice and sunny area.
If climate change lies at the heart of the sinking of the Bayesian, what implications will that have for the yachting industry?
We are going to have to think more about those extreme weather events and maybe enhancing the regulations that we have to cope with this as they become more common.
The maritime authorities learned lessons from big ships like the Costa Concordia. I would like to think that they will learn the lessons of the tragedy of the Bayesian.
There's nothing at the moment that says to me that the yachting industry is poorly regulated. However, we haven't got any facts from the investigation. There may and probably will be lessons to be learned. There may be changes in regulations. Let's see what comes out of the investigation.
It could be at least a year before that report is published, and we know what really happened. How 7 people tragically lost their lives in a freak Mediterranean storm. Weather that could soon become commonplace in just a few years.